Hey everyone, and welcome to the Siege and Sandfox livestream. I'm Chris Wilson, the designer on the project, and today the focus is going to be AI. For those of you not familiar with how I set things out, Tuesday tends to be more focused, not fully prepared, but I've got a good idea of the sort of steps I'm going to go through. Thursday tends to just be a catch-up of what's going on through the week. So anyway, let's hop right over. So any of you who've been sort of paying attention to what I've been doing recently will know that the AI has been my focus. I realized the other day that I've been doing this like a year now or thereabouts. In any case, my first iteration of the AI in Unreal Engine was, about a year ago. So I've learnt a lot in that time, hopefully. And I've gone from something that looks like this huge messy thing, to something much smaller. And I thought I'd just walk you through kind of the reasons I got rid of the old one. What's in the new one and how the new one actually works and why I'm able to have something that's sort of much smaller, but hopefully it's actually more functional than the old one. So I can tell you the old one. I can give you sort of an overview of how this started. The first one, pretty much the first day, I think, I was like, okay, how am I going to make this work? Well, I only need to do two things. And if I hop over to my whiteboard, they need to do two things. They need to be able to walk from point A to point B and back again. And they need to come here, and they need to notice the player and chase after them. That's really about it. So I started by making this service here, which is something that, as you can see, ticks every 0.5 seconds. And I had that running all the time because it's the top level of the tree, and just went, hey, constantly decide if you can see the player or not. And through various means, which are less the focus of this talk, but through various means with the perception, decide if you care enough to chase them, and go from there. So what you end up with is the sort of, what do you call them? The leaves off of this tree are all based immediately on suspicion, even from this level, right? So this is like, I'm a bit suspicious. This is, I'm very suspicious. Very suspicious is realistically like, I'm chasing after you. And because of the way this was structured, everything else is kind of a bit of a bodge, a bit of a hack. So, for example, patrolling only occurs during the absence of suspicion, which kind of makes sense, but it's a bit more complicated than that. So you end up with these little bits here where I'm kind of saying, okay, we'll make sure you weren't previously doing this or that or the other, so it's a bit messy, right? And likewise, the biggest hack of all is I just had a flag, basically, which was saying, hey, if you're waiting for a trigger, if basically I'm saying, if outside of here, in the level, I've forced the AI to do something else, just kind of roll with it. So this is, like, to be blunt, a total mess. This is a collection of all the stuff I couldn't make fit in there properly. And primarily, a lot of this stuff comes down to times where I'd like the AI to do a certain thing, but I wouldn't like it to keep checking if it needs to do something else. So the problem was, anytime, a good example of this would be if the AI heard something and it's going to walk over and check it out. Now the problem here would be, by the way this is set up, as I said, with this service, it's running all the time, right? So constantly, if it can't actually see something, the suspicion's going down. So it hears something in the distance, it starts walking over, and it's not going to increase because it can't see or hear anything new. So it drops and it drops and it drops, and you know what? It probably got bored before it even got there. So I actually have a little hack in here somewhere. How do I do it? I think somewhere I say, hey, you know what, if I've set this random little flag, it's this horrible flag, where is it? Like, if I've set this moving to investigate thing in the blackboard, just kind of don't tick down, even though you should. So you can see how the hacks start, and what you end up with is a lot more branches than you need in here, and crucially, a load more things in the blackboard here. Now, I chatted to some of the guys from Epic about this, and I don't think, like, this isn't too many, like, but I was doing a lot of stupid things where, for example, these yellow ones here are all vectors, right? So there's lots of different positions and locations which are all for moving to. And actually, why do I need several things to move to? Because you can only be moving to one thing at a time. So a lot of it was stuff like that, and a lot of them were little flags, which I'd set. So basically, I looked at this and went, the problem is, everything is based on suspicion, and I'm kind of working around this. I need a different kind of way of doing this sort of thing. So that's when we get over to the new version. Now, I've talked about this a bit before, but I can kind of go through it a little bit. The general gist here is that suspicion is still a thing. It still factors into it, but you'll notice immediately at the top level, it's not ran as a service. We'll dive into it a bit more, but now it's actually something that's part of the AI character controller. So I have something that handles it in here, which we'll get to. So it's handling all of the ticking up, ticking down, when those two states should be running, that sort of thing. But the important thing then is because it's in here, I don't have to have it in an active part of the tree all the time, because anytime it's not active in the tree, it's kind of binned. So really, we're only looking for a couple of things, right? Which were different to before. Before, all it was, am I suspicious of the player? Nothing else mattered. Now, what the player has become is a concept of a target. Only at the moment, the target is anything that has the gameplay tag of target. I could change it to something else later, and realistically, for the time being, that's just the player. But so basically, all of the old functionality kind of falls into here. We have, if I have a target, then I'm going to do these things, which we'll dive into in a minute. But the general gist is that's kind of emulating the huge branch from my old setup. If we go back here. Now, the thing that kind of makes all of this work now is that I have this concept of an... so we'll just work through them in order, right? So the next one is if you have an interest. Now, the interest is the thing I was lacking before. Interest is a kind of bunch of information I can say, this could be anything, but this is a thing that the AI is interested in right now, and here's some details about it. This means, for example, if they heard something far away, as long as there's still their top interest, they'll go and look at that. They don't sort of get bored of that until something else comes in. So if we look at this, it's pretty straightforward, because what you have is this two-way relationship between this interest source and the AI. They talk to each other. And again, if I pop over here, where is my interest source? I think I deleted it, but this is my little silly test level. We'll pretend this is the interest source, right? Now, before, anything that wasn't the player up here wouldn't care about, but this object can be anything, and it can care about it now. It's something that could get spawned by other objects, so you can get the idea of secondary sources. For example, you open the door that was closed, boop, object appears. Now, how this works now is that the AI, using the normal perception system, which we can go into another time, that will look at this, or it will perceive it. So sorry, that's not necessarily just looking. It could be seeing, hearing, smelling, any sense you've got, really. And what it will say is, hey, I have sensed you. And the object itself goes, yep, okay, I understand that. I'm going to wait and see if anyone else sees me. Anyone else, I'm going to keep doing that. Anyone else perceives me in a small space of time. And if they do, you'll get added to this list. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about this because I covered it in an earlier stream. But the general gist is these two talk to each other, and the object itself makes a decision on what the AI should do in terms of what role it's going to fulfill. So actually, that's something else I should have mentioned. Another reason why this is so much sort of smoother and streamlined compared to this old one is that I've pushed a lot of the intelligence into the world, into objects that exist in the world. And that's because the AI shouldn't need to know or care about all of this stuff all of the time. It's only relevant when it's doing it. For example, when you've got an interest, there's certain things you only need to know when you're interacting with that interest. And if you're the only time you care about patrol points and wait times and animations is if you're in a patrol. So we've moved all that stuff out. So long story short, these two have a little conversation with each other, and then it dishes out roles. So if we go in here, you can see that there's a bunch of roles, right? And we're just using simple decorators like blackboard decorators to say, it's an enum, I think, I believe. Yeah, there you go. So you go, hey, you're either investigating, you're a group leader, or you're a bystander. So selector just picks one of those. Investigate we'll come back to because that's probably got the most in it. Group leader is pretty much just like, hey, I'm going to just, just bark an order and basically look like I'm doing something, but I'm actually not doing anything. And finally, anyone else is a bystander. And they'll sort of search on the spot or near to where they are. So this is obviously much better than if all of them investigated, which is what they would do before. So they'd all just run over to you. So now they split into 3 different groups. And crucially, I could add as many different groups as I wanted, but these are the sort of main ones that come to mind. I think when you think of most stealth games, those tend to be the ones you think of. There's the person who actually actively comes to literally the last place you were, someone who sort of say something and be nearby, and anyone else who's within earshot or sort of further away will, they don't all come towards, some of them will search where they are. So we can go into a little bit of depth of the investigate. Actually, I remember, so this has been kind of simplified as well. Now before, if you remember, I had all these little, let's pop over here. I had a lot of these hacks where I am like, let's see, I'm setting various little keys, saying I'm investigating sound, and I'm using a homemade sort of not very good decorator to say, hey, what was the last stimulus you received? So instead of doing that, now I've got an interest source system. This is much nicer, right? I'm not actually doing anything with this yet because I'm still sort of feeling out the whole system. But if you look here, I can just say, hey, that interest source, like what sense was it? And then I can just have a selector on that. So at the moment, hearing and seeing are handled the same way. Ignore the fact this is a sequence, it's because it used to do other stuff, but it doesn't need to anymore. But I could really easily split between them and do different things. And I'm sure that I will end up doing that. And then finally, so we dive right down, and this is again similar to what was in the other one, but not quite the same. And I should point out for anyone who's watching in the chat, if you want me to dive deeper into these specifics, I will. I'm sort of trying to stay sort of medium level, so because obviously if I ran through each of these bit by bit, it's going to take a long time. But the general gist here is again, like you tend to start with a selector with these things. So, to sort of separate from high level. And what this is when you're trying to investigate a source, you want to get as close as possible to it, right? So you say, hey, using this decorator, you go, is there a valid path to this object? I.e., can I walk directly on top of it? Well, can I navigate to underneath it, basically? And if I can, then hey, I'm going to move towards it. And at the moment, my actual investigation is pretty simple. It just does a little loop of a few little search animations back and forth. And when it's done with that, it does this thing where it completes the investigation. Again, that's more sort of interest source related, so I won't dive into it too much, but that's part of that two-way conversation between the interest source and the AI. And the AI says, as far as I'm concerned, this object is investigated. And the object says, okay, I agree. I'm going to tell everyone else who's kind of listening to me that I'm no longer relevant, and then I'm going to delete myself, and then everything will sort of resume. But what if you can't reach it, right? So again, just the inverse of that decorator. You say, is there a full path? There isn't one. And you go, yeah, that's fine. You can still use the same move too, because happy to be corrected here, but I believe this is what this partial path does. That's what it says it does, but I'm not quite sure. So it says, if set, use incomplete path when the goal can't be reached. So again, over to the old fake whiteboard. If I am over here and they are over here, at the moment they can't jump, jumping to come soon. They know that they cannot path to you, but what they would do is move as close as they could before doing the next thing. Now, at the moment, this is something where we don't do anything, because if they can't reach, we just have them sort of do a back and forth search, just so they do something. I notice a lot of games, like 3D games, like Dishonored, for example, what they do is they have them chuck rocks, things like that. But I think the important thing is, in a sort of reliable manner, I'm able to capture that decision on the tree where it's like, I'm aware that I can see them, and I'm aware that I can't reach them. And again, in this situation, because it's an interest source rather than a player, whoops, made a mistake there. So it's interest source, not the player. So anything but the player. I only say that because they can't move. So this means that obviously if you saw the interest source, you're like, well, I know that, and I know I'm never going to be able to get to it. But what you can do is say, well, because I've moved to using a partial path, this is as close as I can ever get to it. So I can begin my search here. And crucially, if I do my search nearby, sort of look left, look right, look around, I can still say to that object, I'm the closest person. Well, more accurately, I'm the person you assigned to investigate yourself. This is as good as I can do, so this is done. So you'll notice that this is the same. The complete investigation is the same, whether you get on top of the object or next to the object. Over time, I'm sure to expand this to be sort of a more advanced smart object system, where rather than just saying, there's no real link between these objects. It just says, I've investigated you, but there's no, okay, I moved to this location and I performed this animation in this place, which says that it's finished. For example, I don't know, a bunch of drawers or something. You could walk up to the drawers, open them, close them, and then go, that sort of thing could be smart object based. But at the moment, it just does a sort of generic animation and it says, this is resolved. And then if we go back up to the top, so you can see that's all neatly in there. And I also realized I missed another important thing, and what's made this so much easier to sort out is I started using these a bit, but didn't really embrace them. Instead of having the whole tree under here, you can do this run behavior, and does what it says on the tin. Really, there are a few limitations, but they're pretty minor, and you can just run any other behavior tree underneath it. And the cool thing is, well, I think if I try this, does this work? Things never work when you want to. I'm sure there you go. You can hover over them and get a preview of varying quality, to be honest, but it's normally enough to kind of see what's going on. So that keeps this. I think what's important to me that was bad with the old one, if we look at that again, is it's very easy to even, you can be close enough to read the text and sort of see exactly what's going on, but you could get a kind of good snapshot of what's going on. So at the top level, it's only doing one of these 4 things. So we've covered the target one, which at the moment, as I said, just chase the player and kill them. We've covered sort of a generic interest source where it's like, hey, this is a thing you know about, we're having a conversation, and you're going to investigate it or carry out any other role that the object assigns. And the next one is patrolling. So this is, again, a relatively straightforward one. My initial implementation of this ages ago was very basic, but the thing is, I think what's important to note is it was super basic, but it was only very recently that it kind of came unstuck. So actually, I feel like that was the right decision to do that. So the initial implementation of these was basically, they weren't linked to any other objects. Put that back. They weren't linked to any other object. They had sort of no sense of what they were. All they were was an actor in space, and they had a reference to another waypoint. And when the AI reached one of them, it said, hey, what's the next one? And then the next waypoint would say that, and so on and so forth. So you can see how that would work with a nice back to forth. I mean, you can even add in more, but it kind of becomes a bit complicated. And also, again, what you're doing, if we look in here just briefly, again, what you're doing is you're putting a lot of the intelligence into this tree and a lot of the decision making in here. Whereas really this should be kind of high level, like exactly what waypoint you're going to and what you're doing. That doesn't need to be managed from here, in my opinion, because you end up with a lot of, you see here, this is doing everything, right? It's saying, check if a waypoint is set, turn around, set your facing direction, find more information about it, wait at it, play another animation, turn around. And also this one handled like, oh, if there's no waypoints, do this. And that works. Again, you end up with a couple of extra keys in here. I can't remember. So there's like a patrol waypoint. And then I think it's got a separate like target location and start location, stuff like that. So again, there's a lot of stuff in there that if you think of an AI that might never patrol or rarely uses them, there's just a bunch of stuff sitting in here that doesn't do anything. And again, like in terms of performance, that's not really a problem. It's not a performance issue. It's a clarity issue. What I like about this is that I can look at it and I can see what it's doing quickly, like, and I could happily read the detail of all of these keys here and not be overwhelmed. So how does this one work? Well, again, I mean, you should be able to see from here, this is a lot simpler. This is the whole thing, right? It's just move to the target that's been set, do what the patrol node asks you to do, what the waypoint asks you to do, and then ask for the next one. So how is it doing all that other stuff that it did before? So that's where, again, I'm shoving it into the world. These aren't linked properly. I need to have a sort of read around the way you're correctly meant to associate objects, because I don't think this is quite a parent-child situation, but whatever. Like, in theory, this works. The idea is that the AI, if we look here, grab one of these dudes, is associated with a patrol object. I'd love a better name for that, but it works. They're associated with that object. They don't need to know or care about any of the actual waypoint nodes that they go to. They don't ever communicate with them for anything. Everything is done through this patrol object. The patrol object has an array of the different nodes in it here. and I think it also says like which one you start at, and you have, you know, the various sort of controls, like is it looping, is it valid, because, you know, for example, we might turn them on and off during gameplay, so AI could move around, you know, say they fall back or whatever, don't know, but the point is that's easy to handle at this level. So that opens the door for making things more complicated. Like, for example, I don't know the proper name for this, but let's say, like, I always call it ping pong. I know in animation it's called that, but, you know, instead of having we do this, then this, then this, then this, you can just go back and forth between those or any combination of them. So you can do all of that because the AI doesn't need to handle different situations. All it ever asks is what's next, and this object tells it. And crucially, again, because there's a sort of focal point for all this stuff, is that I can stop the situation where multiple AI try and use them, or you want to have them close, but they all end up using the same object. Before, I think, from memory, you could either like directly associate an AI with a single waypoint, or they would just pick whichever was closest. And obviously, when you've got multiple AI around, that's when you start to get in trouble. A lot of these problems, actually, to be honest, came from having a lot of AI together. So I can probably show a little bit more about how this works because it's not complicated. So the move to, it's just straight up basic move to target. Like we just have a key in here. And again, notice I've only got one now. I had like 3 or 4 vector keys that are all basically move to targets. And for various reasons, I know what I was thinking. I do know at the time. For various reasons, I could have just used one. You're only ever going to try and move to one place at a time, right? Now, this next one is, I might change my mind on this, but I will point it out. What I wanted to do here is that, again, this is a thing where I want the object itself in the world to handle the decisions for what happens, partially because I feel like the tree should be high level and this is kind of low level, but also I feel it's going to let the other designers on the project just get on with it without having to get up in my tree. So, for example, I'm trying to remember how this works. I think for now I'm testing things out, so I've only exposed a few things. There's like a waiting time, and there's a direction that the AI should face, either left or right. And obviously, if you set none, that just means whichever direction you arrive at, I'm cool with. Later on, obviously, this is where you'd add things like animations and extra weights and whatever. Now, all this used to live in the behavior tree, as you can see in the old version, if I find it. In the old version, it's all set here explicitly, right? It's like, set your facing direction, turn around if you need to, play this animation, play that animation. You'll note that these are just weights, but that was always the intention, that they would play animations in here. I'm sure they did. But anyway, the point is it was all here as a separate tree. Instead, now I make this part of the, where did it go? So many things. Part of the patrol node, and all the task does at the behavior tree level is kicks it off and says, hey, patrol object that manages all the nodes, give me the current node and kick off the tasks. And then basically on a tick, it just says, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? I hate polling stuff that way, but it seems to work. And again, what that means is from this level, if we go back here, it's just this. It's just one task, and this one task could do anything, and anything that other people wanted it to do. But at this level, you just know that it's doing the stuff that it's supposed to do. And I kind of feel like that's all you need to know. And then the next one is just saying, hey, where am I moving to next? And again, this is done directly to the patrol object that looks after them. And it looks really simple from this point, right? It just says, okay, I find the patrol object that's on the blackboard, and I say, give me the next node position, and then I get that as a value, and I set that in my blackboard again, and I'm off and moving. And even if we look at this, it's pretty, yeah, I mean, admittedly, I should do this another way. I think I tried to do more complicated stuff, and then kind of got rid of it. But the point is, because this is like a function as part of this object, I could put in more complicated logic, different logic for different classes, all sorts of crazy complicated stuff. But the AI itself and the behavior tree doesn't care. It just says, whatever's next, that's all I care about. And that feels better, and it makes this so much, makes this so much more readable. And then, yeah, the other thing is kind of this situation that probably shouldn't ever occur, but this is a great tip if you're just starting out behavior trees. It's always good to have something that catches kind of a state you never expect it to be in and have a reasonably long wait. Because if you take this weight out, for example, and none of these conditions are true, which can happen, especially when I'm testing, it will just flick like super quickly through all of them, and that's not very helpful for trying to work out what's going on. Okay, what else has been going on here? I mean, these are the main things. So the bit I'm literally working on at the moment is in the target part of it. So the basics do already work. So when we have sort of a low suspicion, we just pop up the little question mark, and they basically wait. But because they'll already be facing the direction of the issue, they'll probably do the right thing. In fact, you know what? If I'm really lucky, I might have left this part working. Because as I said, this is literally like my work in progress level, which I break all the time. But let's see. So I'm going to tell him not to associate with any patrol route, which will mean that, look here. So when he starts up, he won't have a target, he won't have an interest, and he won't have a patrol. So he's actually going to use this fallback, which is what I want, because, fingers crossed, the show. Have a look. All happens a bit fast. I should really add a slow motion button or something. So if we get a bit close, question mark, and then turns to exclamation mark. And then, so you see there's bits that need fixing, but you see, again, it's all a bit too fast, but he goes through the state of questioning what he's seeing, knowing what he's seeing is bad, chasing after it. Then when he loses sight, he starts moving over to the last place he saw you. So let's run through why that happens. I'd step through the tree bit by bit, but it's quite chunky, so like it's kind of, it might not work so well. We might be able to try it in a bit. But anyway, so let's run through what happened there, right? So I'll run through the suspicion system if there's time, because I'm aware that the epic stream is after this one. But basically, if you have low suspicion, which is the kind of first stage, you just pop that little bit of UI you saw, the little cool question mark that one of our artists, Ed, did. You play a little animation, which I don't think is working at the moment, but that's fine. And then you wait. Now, the idea is you'd wait here, but the reality is this bit probably doesn't happen much, because if you saw in that situation, it pops that UI, it does a suspicious search, but in that time it's still facing the player, so suspicion keeps going up and up and up and up. So pretty quickly you snap out of suspicion level 1 into suspicion level 2. And that's when you trigger like this being alarmed, which is where you see the exclamation mark and the kind of look. And amusingly, I always forget to turn it off. There's some little debug sounds in there as well. But anyway, so that happens. That's part of the kind of intro of that sequence. And then this is, again, similar to the other setup where the selector here is saying, can I reach the player or can I not reach the player? Actually, I should try and stick to my terminology. Can I reach the target or can I make a... It's this thing where I have to be so careful because, you know, obviously it only does exactly what you tell it to. Can I navigate to the location I can see my target at? So if I can see them, I'm basically going to face towards them if I'm not already. And then I'm going to do this simple parallel, which I'll come back to, which I'm basically going to run up and try and kill them, attack them. And if I can't do that, this is again another situation where we're capturing, but we don't know what to do with yet. I say, okay, well, I can't get to it, but you know what? Using a partial path, get as close as you can, and for the time being, just kind of stare into space at them, which is something we can do, right? So, what would be the best way to... You know what I can do is also show one game. When you got this, right? So actually, now what I will do with him is I'll leave him there, and I will target this object. So I say, hey, listen to this guy, and then from this guy, I will say the starting node is this one, and then what I'll do is whack myself over here, start the game, and then so he comes over to that, and then you see he does the question mark, and then the alert, and then he gets as close as he can, and then now he's just going to wait forever, because for the time being, you know, there's nothing we can do there. As I said, later on, he'll probably chuck stuff or maybe call for help or whatever. But the important thing is he's in that situation where he knows what's going on. You know, the behavior tree isn't kind of, you know, going crazy. It goes, nope, I know what's going on. I'm stuck here. Okay, let's kill that. So let's quickly go back to this simple parallel then. This is the only time I've ever used this. we have this situation where, let's see if that part works actually. Let's have him kill me just for fun so you can do that, which I think works. Famous last words. Find out. Here it comes. Pow. There we go. So that does work. Now, the situation we have here is, if you think about how this works when you're moving to attack someone, even by the nature of the way these work, right, a sequence is literally a sequence. Do this, when that's finished, do this, when that's finished, do this. So if you're trying to attack someone that's moving, it doesn't really work, because if you think what you do is, if you were to say move to where they are, okay, and then you finish moving to where they are, and then you attack, if they're still moving in the time that you've stopped and moved to attack, they're somewhere else. And so we ended up with this hilarious situation where you're running along. Well, you didn't even have to run, to be honest. You could walk incredibly slowly, and they would just be one step behind, just constantly trying to attack you. And we tried all kind of weird solutions, and none of that really seemed to work. And in the end, I realized that what we wanted was this simple parallel. And it kind of does what it says, right? It does what I've named it, move and attack, but also it does one thing while looking at see if it can do another thing, right? So it's constantly moving all the time towards the target, which is the player in this instance. And it has this decorator we made called check attack range, which is literally, there's a collision box. I wonder if it's still visible. Yes. So this box here, it tests that collision box against the player capsule. Not sure which one, I'll be honest, but against the one that's going to make them dead. And as soon as that is overlapping, that becomes true. So if you look, basically the reason we do this is kind of a safety, right? It's never going to try and attack if it's not definitely going to hit. Maybe later on we'll mess with that to kind of make it a bit more interesting, like maybe sort of guards that are less good might swing and miss, but I wanted to tune it from like being very lethal down rather than being incompetent up, which is kind of what we had before. Like they would swing and miss most of the time, and it looked kind of funny, like he'd look like a hero, but we didn't want that. So anyway, we checked we're definitely going to hit them, and then we attack them. But the crucial thing is you're still moving as you attack them. So actually, we spent some time sort of tuning the animation and so on, but actually there is a sort of tiny bit of sliding, so you know, because they're still doing a footstep. Well, no, the character model is, there's no model. God, I spent too long in 3D. Sorry, guys. The sprite's still moving, even though it's gone from a sort of walking animation to a attacking animation. So there's a tiny bit of slide, but it's not that noticeable, and also it feels so much better. Like they attack and kill you when they feel like they should. So I think that's kind of all of that. That's one part of it. Right. Now the part where I'm starting to get somewhere, which is a relief because I was really worried this wouldn't tie together. So if you remember this, I've got this distinction between a target and an interest, right? So that covers when you can see the player, and it covers everything else when they can't see the player, but it doesn't cover when you did see the player and you can't anymore. So this is you know, what's commonly known as like last known position, right? You do a lot of work around there. The typical thing is, right, the AI is following the target disappears. The AI should get to the point where the target was, or as close as it could, and start the search there, because often you'll pick them up again, right? Now in the old system, boy, let's have a look. This again was, you know, one of these kind of, I think I can hack this together. So you'll notice that some of the last known position stuff, this LKP stuff, is being sort of set and directly managed, and there's like cloning of vectors and sort of moving of stuff happening in the tree, and that's leading to having a lot of keys here. There's like an enemy object, a last known position vector, and object. God, who knows why, but it all kind of worked, but it was split very awkwardly between here and the character controller. And also it was kind of a hack. It wasn't an actual thing, whereas now it doesn't quite work perfectly yet, but I'm so pleased this is kind of starting to work. Is that last known position is really just a kind of interest source. So if you think about it, like the interest source normally is like a secondary source. As I said, like for some reason my go-to example is a door that was closed, you open it, the AI notices now that it's open. and goes over and has to look at the door and goes, and then just goes back to whatever they were doing. So in terms of how my system works, what happens is the door has its initial state. The player changes the initial state, which would then spawn this interest source object as a separate object. And it would have an instigator variable that would say, hey, the door created me, but whatever. So the AA walks over. Well, actually, no, let's go through the whole thing. So there's the interest source there. Maybe multiple people would notice it. They would see it. They register the interest source. The interest source goes, okay, here's everyone I know that noticed this thing happening. You are the investigator. You guys do the other things. The investigator's going to come over, and he's going to just do some animation, like looking around, and he's going to go, I consider this investigated, and the object destroys itself, right? So basically, all of that applies to last known position. If you think about that, AI is chasing a player, player disappears somewhere. At the point they disappear, that's the new interest source, right? So that's kind of what I do. If we have a look in, again, this goes back into the character controller. So we're heading over into a bit of perception stuff here because it's relevant. Again, I'm going to skim over it a little because it's stuff I've covered before, but if it's stuff anyone's really interested in, by all means mention it in the chat and I'll sort of go in a bit further. But what you end up with is you end up with a split between targets and interest sources to start with, right? And so if it's a target, which for the time being is just the player, what we do is we do our suspicion processing, which is basically, it's either going to go up if I've just, you see I'm using a successfully sensed ball there. It's like it's either going to go up or it's going to go down. It's going to go up if I can sense them, and it's going to go down if I can't sense them. But what is different, or this is a bit I'm literally just working on now, what is different is that you say, okay, if you just stopped sensing them, then this is when we want to deploy this sort of last known position concept. Now this isn't, this is a bit rough and ready, but the general idea is I look at it and go, okay, does this object already exist? And this is an object that's managed by the character controller, not the behavior tree. The behavior tree's got nothing to do with it. And I go, does this object already exist? Yes, no. If it does, create it. If it doesn't, rather create it. If it does, move it to this new point. And then the cool thing is, basically, all I do is I say, oh, by the way, this is just your standard interest source, right? And it fills in all of these things, and it says, yep, I'm this object. You saw me. I am of a type last known position, and I'm very high priority. I don't know if, I think it's going to be a 1 to 10 scale. Who knows? But I'm very high priority, right? And you set those, and because I haven't decided here quite where the relationship sits, but the idea is that normally, obviously, the interest source itself manages who comes to investigate. In this situation, at the minute, I'll be honest, I'm just forcing it. Like I'm forcing it, or the whole thing into the tree. I just consider it like it's injecting this interest. So the whole thing basically goes into the AI, and then the cool thing is, obviously, it just works. Famous phrase, I know, but it really does. Because from then onwards, it can be processed the same way. You want to do the same thing. You want to get close to it. You want to investigate it. And the crucial thing is, right, if they were investigating it, it's a roll-off here. Then if the player comes back, or by virtue of starting this, they see the player again, then these will all abort out, and they'll start chasing them again. There are some problems, though, which I have to decide how to fix, in that these interest objects, oh, this isn't one, but let's pretend it is, any AI can currently see and sense them. And so when they report in, they can decide if they can, you know what, we got a little bit more time, let's have a look, a little bit more time, maybe five or so minutes. So there's the, oh no, that's the patrol object. I'm such, it's in here. Right, so the bit I was talking about is discovery, right? So the way I handle this is the first thing that happens that starts this conversation between the interest source and the AI is this concept of discovery, right? The AI says, I am now aware of you. Am I allowed to discover you, right? And discovery is when you start the two-way relationship. At the moment, the only thing that that stops them discovering is yes. Okay. So at the moment, the only way I limit this is I say, I've already assigned the roles, as in this interest source has already said, you're investigating, you're doing this, you're doing that. If somehow another AI turned up, like they were patrolling or walking through, they're not allowed to discover it because what would they do? It seems kind of weird. Again, this is something kind of fine-tuning I'm sure we'll come back to, but for now it seems weird, right? Everyone is already sort of handling their roles, and this other random guy turns up, and I think he would probably, it feels like he'd just see the others and be like, okay, they've got this under control. Anyway, so at the moment, that's the only thing that stops discovery. The thing I need to work out how to handle this, I want it to be fairly generic, but maybe this is one of the cases where it isn't, is for this object, obviously for the last known position, it's only important to the AI who saw that and generated it. No other AI is going to look at this last known position and have it be valuable. And later on, maybe they will share them. I'm not sure. As in, maybe several AI will share a last known position. I don't know is the honest answer to that. My gut feeling is no. You only ever show one to the player, but there's probably several. Don't know. But anyway, this is probably a situation where you'd have to say, hey, well, I know that you actually saw me because I'm a physical object, but because you're not the instigator of this object, of this particular class of object, you are not allowed to sense me. And that sounds quite complicated. Like, it's certainly doable, but it sounds kind of brittle and not very generic, which leads to, big messes like this. So we'll have to see. I think I've nearly covered everything that's going on. So yeah, the main focus is to improve this, really. This bit works really well. I'm really pleased with that. It was kind of a relief how easily it worked. And the patrol was nice as well. I'm trying to think what else have I done that made life easier. I honestly think that's mostly it. I mean, a lot of this stuff is just, so this is probably the worst of it, as I said. Like, this is where we've seen the biggest savings, right? Because this has gone from this huge, quite complicated, quite brittle thing to just a couple of things here. And that's because the target system and the interest source system being separate has kind of helped out. But I believe, you know what? That's it. Oh, I did have a question. I haven't sort of officially handled this yet, but the general deal is I genuinely would love questions because it's quite useful to know what to aim at specifically. Either via Twitter or via our website, anywhere really. But I did see in one of the threads on the Chucklefish forum, someone asked, so they said, what if an AI suspects, what if an AI suspects and chases towards a point it can't reach? So I did cover that. What if when it's chasing the player, it can't reach the point, but another guard can? Curious if there is a status where more than one guard is alerted and coordinate to hunt down the player. So I think I've mostly covered that, the way the interest source system works, in that fake whiteboard time. So in the rubbish version, just for testing purposes, right? Let's say this was a thing they heard rather. Now at the moment, what would happen is, all three of them would report, hey, I saw you, I'm aware of you, and the object would go, okay, cool, right, all I'm going to do is I'm going to see who's closest, hey, who's closest, you're the investigator, who's next closest, you're the leader, who's next, you're like a bystander. Now, it's easy to expand this, right? Because let's say, for example, I know, for argument's sake, this guy could jump, and this guy can't. Not a thing, but let's pretend it was. Rather than the idea, which I think this person's implying, that these sort of, these guys together try and form a plan and they pick the best person, which is overcomplicated for our needs, in my opinion. What this could do is, it can be aware of that and it can filter by the class and it can say, hey, well, you're the most maneuverable class, so actually you should be doing this, even though you're not technically the closest. And also thinking about it depending on the way we do jumping and other sort of non-walking and running navigation, we'll still probably be able to generate a navigation path between the 2 points. And what I would do, I mean, it's certainly an expansion I want to make, is to say, rather than, hey, who is the closest in Unreal units or whatever, I would ask them to say, who has the shortest navigation path to me, is probably the best way to do it. And then we sort them by that, or by class, or by anything. But basically the deal is that the object makes all the decisions, the guards don't sort of work it out amongst themselves. And one final sort of modifier on that is that you know, what, say this guy could be, again, this guy could be a leader or something. Actually, sorry, the other way around. Either or. This guy's someone special of one way or another, and he could go towards this object, know that he can't reach it, and if we go back here, as you said, we capture this state where we know that they can't reach it. Now, rather than just waiting forever, what we could do here is have... Oh, there's the other one. Right, so I used to doing that one. So you could have run behavior dynamic, right? And we could use different classes of enemies could do different things. So the weakest enemy could do nothing, stare into space or something like that. Whereas we could say, hey, for a better class, for a smarter class, you wouldn't go in there on your own. You would call for backup. And off the top of my head, my assumption is that calling for backup, again, would be a kind of relationship with the object. The object, this thing, the actual source of interest, is the one that's going to figure that out. So I think that kind of handles how I intend to do those things. But again, always, you know, please do fire over other questions. But I think, oh, look at that. That's perfect timing for me. So thank you very much for coming along and checking out the AI in the game. I should point out, I normally sort of preface it with this. I certainly do not claim to be an expert of this stuff. I spent a year working with it. I feel like I'm competent with it, but I still learn stuff all the time. And crucially, a lot of the stuff I figured out was sort of trial and error, and certainly not through documentation, because it's there, but it's basic. So I just wanted to share kind of, you know, my thought process with it and kind of how it's going. But I'm always interested to see how anyone else is doing it, so please let me know. So I will be back on Thursday doing a sort of general catch up on the rest of the game. So if you're interested in other parts of it, you know, there'll be stuff going on there. But thank you very much. Please make sure to check out our website, Siege and Sandfox, and Twitter, and all the rest of those delicious things. I'm gonna go now. Goodbye.